let's talk about how you determine if your problem is worth solving. Now, this can sometimes seem like a little bit of a challenge, but it's important to do the challenge and to have you be the one doing it against your own problem. Because I assure you, if you don't really try and think through if your problem is worth solving and if there's really value and a solution to be unlocked here, someone will. It'll be a lead, it'll be your investor, it'll be your mom, it'll be somebody, and it's going to cut and you're not going to have a good answer and you're going to not be happy about that. And it's not something that you have to do. It's something that you really should do and will put you in the best position possible to inevitably defend yourself, which somebody's going to challenge you. So better you be prepared for it and welcome it and, see it as an exciting opportunity to demonstrate everything that you've learned and all of your prep work versus something that hope doesn't happen because then you'll be, up a river without a paddle. And that's not exactly where you want to be. So we're going to talk about some of the big questions that you should look into, you should ask yourself, you should do research, you should fold into your customer interviews, things that allow you to go, is this something that really needs a solution? Because it's one of those things where just because it's a problem doesn't mean it's a big problem. And just because it's a problem doesn't mean it's a problem that can be solved through the startup, medium and through the startup activities. It could just be a problem that's an inconvenience. And if that inconvenience doesn't have big impacts and, monetizable impacts, then you have to ask yourself, is this something worth really leaning into and building a solution for? So again, 4 significant questions that we're going to discuss. First and foremost, is it popular or is it frequent? So let's break this down. Popularity means how many people have it, right? If everyone on earth has your problem, it's a good place to start. It means there's people, it means there's engagement, it means there's a reason from at least the highest level to believe there's something worth doing here. Frequency. So frequency is how often are the people that are coming into your problem coming against it, right? How often are they struggling with this, encountering it, having to deal with it over and over and over again? So the best case scenario is everybody has your problem and everybody encounters it all the time. The clearest example of something like this would be Uber, right? Because everybody needs a car or needs access to transportation, and everybody comes into it every single day. They're always running up against it. And also, if you take an Uber one way, more than likely you're going to need an Uber back. So every single Uber is effectively 2 times that you're encountering a problem. That's a good problem to have, right? And a good thing to, work to solve. Now, that doesn't mean that it has to be both, right? It could be that everybody has the problem and it's not very frequent, but so many people have it that it's still worth solving. And likewise, it could be that the frequency amongst the more limited population is just very high. So for example, one of our clients is a healthcare company. The people that they serve are very limited in number, right? 10,000, 20,000, 50, 100,000 of these facilities or places that are in the world, right, are in their target market in the beginning. However, the problems they encounter are every day, every single month, every single quarter, every single year. So they have enough consistent pain within this more limited market to still make it worth solving and to really unlock some value. So again, what are the dynamics at play in the market and in the kind of problem sphere that you're looking to solve? Next is, how is the growth of the industry? Now, this is an interesting one because you don't really have any control over this, right? Not that you have control over the other pieces, but this is something that you don't really get too much credit for or too much credit against, but it's more of a mental positioning point to really think through. So here's the example. If the industry is growing really quickly, think COVID at the beginning of the pandemic and all of the healthcare companies and healthcare startups that really just blew up overnight, right? That industry was growing really quickly, right? And, still is. So there's a ton of investment, a ton of companies. And just like anything else, if there's a ton of something, that means competition. That means higher prices. That means that there's more competition for the same amount of money or, a little bit more money, but you're really kind of putting yourself in the meat grinder of who am I going against and how am I going to win. What this also means, you have to think about it if you're the investor, right? I have 10 times more companies coming at me. I have 10 times more investors that are going after those companies because they want to tap into the growth and really see these businesses scale and, of course, make a bunch of money and have a bunch of impact, all these things. That sounds expensive. It sounds really expensive. And it sounds like a company that was worth 5 million one day is now being sold for 10 million, and the investors are pushing that value to 15 million, and all of a sudden something that could be fairly valued and raise $1 million at a $6 million valuation, whatever it might be, is now looking for $8 million at a $20 million valuation, which completely changes the dynamic of who invests and how they invest and the story that you're telling and all of these pieces. So expect that if you're going into an industry that's growing really quickly, not only that you're going to encounter competition, but that investors are potentially going to push you really hard on valuation because they know potentially some of your valuation is coming from industry momentum, not even you just generating the value within your business itself. Now let's look at the opposite side of that. If the industry is not growing or it's smaller or slower growth. Now, there's a few things to consider. So the industry could be not growing because it's already huge, right? It's hard to make a big thing bigger, right? At the same speed that you can make a small thing bigger, right? So there's a reason why certain industries are a little bit more limited or that they aren't growing as quickly because they're already so big that it's already, at size that it needs to be valuable. That's fine. No issues. Tap into the market and, do your thing. But the other side is if you're very early, right? So the easiest example that I can think of is cannabis, right? Imagine you're in cannabis 5, 10, 20 years ago, whatever it might be, when there was very, both a consumer and a public sentiment, but also government and regulations were especially cracking down on you, right? If you were investing there, it wasn't because you didn't know it was early. It's because you wanted to be that first mover as soon as the market was opened, right? That way you could be the Coca-Cola of, right, growing CBD or growing, cannabis, whatever, or manufacturing or distribution or 100 other sub-industries that exist within that, one large industry. And that's okay. It's strategic, it's thoughtful, but if your timeline is extended, you have to think about what that means for investment, for longevity, for expectations, for risk. These are all important things to consider because if you don't consider them, you're going to end up facing them either way, whether it's through questions from an investor or just the reality of building your business and encountering some of these problems with the industry growth or problems with the industry sentiment or activities that are taking place. So again, think it through. Do the research, understand what's going on in your industry and what questions or challenges you might encounter as it relates to growth. Next is cost, right? How costly is it? Now, it's important to remember cost is not just dollars. Cost is time. Cost is energy. Cost is a pleasurable experience, right? Cost is opportunity cost. So you could be making more money, or you could be having a better time, or you could have less risk. All of these things that are costs and are expensive, whether it's immediately impactful like a dollar or like a fine or a fee, or it's long-term impactful in that, hey, your employees have a really bad time using the systems that are available and you have really high churn over the last 3 to 5 years, and that's cost you $5 million in extra expense that you wouldn't have had to pay if you would have had a system that was more intuitive and more helpful and more collaborative and 100 other great things that, reduce the cost of that problem, right? Now, last but not least is it mandatory? Now, mandatory is an interesting one, not just because government regulations and if one industry requires that people are going to use a software, then of course, people that are creating softwares that fit that need, they're going to have some captive demand. They're going to have people that are pushed to make a sale. So you're going to have an easier conversion threshold. But what does that also mean? Sounds like you're going to have some good competition, right? Because if I know there's demand coming and I'm reasonably smart and educated in the industry, I'm probably going to try and do something similar, or I'm going to try and build the Lyft to your Uber, right? There's plenty of money to be made and plenty of opportunities to tap into, even if you're the number 2, 3, 4, 10. Imagine if you were number 10 in the list of car driving, the like Ubers and Lyfts and all of these kind of taxi type services. You'd still be huge. you would still be a really big company. So don't look at the fact that just because something's big, you're not going to get another competitor, or that competitor might not be very happy to learn from all the mistakes that you've made and make something a little bit better, right? To tweak their way to success and start building in those advantages that make it, hey, we only win 1 in 10 deals against them today, but in a year from now, maybe it's 3 in 10 deals. And then all of a sudden we're in a market that they're not in. And then all of a sudden we discover a little innovation that they were too big and too unfocused on their internal innovation to capitalize on. Big opportunities, even in competitive markets. So the one is it mandatory from like the government, from the law, from the industry, whatever it might be? Good thing to know and a good thing to have an expectation around. The other side of mandatory is it socially mandatory, right? Socially mandatory, the clearest example of this is being green or eco-friendly, right? Imagine you're an oil company that just didn't care at all about the environment. On top of the fact that there are government regulations, there are going to be companies and people, and maybe a company competes with you by saying, hey, we're the same as them, but we actually care. So you can feel good about using our solution and support the world or support the planet or support, revitalizing the industry or the community, and still get the same service at the same or maybe even a little bit more of a premium price because, hey, do you want to pay for a better impact and for more stuff going on that allows us to invest and build? I'm thinking of exciting positioning ideas just because I know that something might be mandatory and I can finagle my way around to make my offer that much more compelling, right? But the social side is the implied mandatory, right? If it's expected, if it's encouraged, if it's a media movement and you're very, very against it, expect to have social pressures come into play. It may not come into play when you're first building, but problems accrue over time. If you're doing something illegal and you're a small company, the SEC or the government or whatever it might be might not notice. But as you get bigger and bigger and bigger, they're going to notice and they're going to see you as an example and they're going to make an example out of you. And you shouldn't do that. You should prepare for it. You should expect that these things are going to come and figure out creative ways to solve and to lean into if something's mandatory, if something is socially mandatory, or if something has the potential of becoming mandatory. What's going on in the legislature? What's going on in the broader political ecosystem? Again, how informed are you on your business, especially if you're operating in a very confusing or very kind of high impact or high focus business? Healthcare, cannabis, law, banking, finance, fintech, all of these, similar and equally complex in their own ways industries that have a ton of regulation and changes and lobbyists and people that are going and invoking a lot of change in the industry. So again, hopefully this was really helpful and it allows you to think through and frame a little bit more of the problem and really start to challenge yourself and your teammates and your community and whoever else is involved in you building your business to make sure that you're building something that has a real problem to solve, because a real problem to solve invites a fantastic solution to meet that need. And if you can do that, then all of a sudden upwards and away you go. Then it just becomes a question of not if this will work, but it gets to my favorite place, which is how this will work. How can we move faster? How can we do this? How can we do that? Not if someone will buy from us or if we can deliver value. It's a lot less exciting. So perfect. Hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully this gives you, again, a way to think through your problem a little bit more clearly and a little bit more specifically. And we look forward to seeing you in the next video.